All right, so as promised, this is our special White Man's Burden Analysis edition. So let's see what is going on here. So we already talked about these two, well, really just kind of these stanzas up here. But just to kind of reiterate, right? Take up the white man's burden, send forth the best you breed, go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' needs, to wait in heavy harness, unfluttered folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child. Take up the white man's burden, in patience to abide, to veil the threat of terror and check the show of pride, by open speech and simple, 100 times made plain, to seek another's profit, to work another's gain. Right, and what we really talked about in those two verses was how imperialism and colonization is seen as this burden, right? That it is the white man's duty to quote unquote civilize other non-white peoples, and how that's kind of strange. It's kind of weird, kind of cringy. All right, so let's pick up. Take up the white man's burden, the savage wars of peace. I'm not even sure, like, what is he trying to tell us here? So the savage wars of peace. So like imperial conquest, it is violence, but it will lead to peace, ? Fill full the mouth of famine, yea, we're feeding them, and bid the sickness cease. Oh my gosh, we're going to make sure that they're not sick. That's nice of us. And when your goal is nearest, the end for others sought. So again, right, why are we doing this? We're doing this for them. Watch sloth and heathen folly bring all your hopes to naught. So what Kipling is telling us here is that if you quote, oh, buddy, I can't believe that I'm writing this. If you go native, which is a really kind of cringy thing to say, that you will be unsuccessful, right? So if you get too wrapped up in the lifestyle, then it's going to be bad. All right, take up the white man's burden. No tawdry rule of kings. So something that's tawdry is kind of like showy, but like in a rhinestones kind of way, not in like a diamonds kind of way. So basically any quote unquote kings that they have, you're going to get rid of. But toil of serf and sweeper, the tale of common things. So we're emphasizing this kind of hard work, this stiff upper lip that we associate with the British imperial project, right? That you just kind of grin and bear it and do hard work. The ports you shall not enter, the roads you shall not tread. Go make them with your living and mark them with your dead, right? So just again, we're emphasizing how hard and difficult this is going to be. Take up the white man's burden and reap his old reward. The blame of those you better, the hate of those ye guard. So they won't like you. The cry of hosts you humor. So the people there that you listen to, slowly towards the light, so slowly, gosh, they're so slow. Quote, why brought ye us from bondage, our loved Egyptian night? So this is kind of about like Exodus from the Old Testament. Take up the white man's burden, you dare not stoop to less. So like your pride and your ego demands that you do this, nor call too loud on freedom to cloak your wariness. So like don't give up and give them freedom just because you're tired. By all you cry or whisper, by all you leave or do, of a silent, sullen peoples shall weigh your gods in you. So you will be working so hard, oh my gosh, so hard to make them better, and they will just judge you. How dare they? Last one. Take up the white man's burden, have done with childish days. Oh, so the United States has been childish because we haven't embarked on an empire yet. Interesting. I'm sure that people in the United States, the Americans, really took that well. The lightly proffered laurel. So laurel, proffered means like literally offered, like handed out. And laurel is this sign of victory, right? The easy ungrudged praise comes now to search your manhood, right? So this idea of we are basically equating imperialism with masculinity, which there's actually like a whole book written on about the Spanish-American War and how it just is, it's like literally called American Manhood, I think. I'll have to check. It's on my wish list on Amazon. But So we're really wrapping these two things up together. Through all the thankless years, cold-edged with dear-bought wisdom, the judgment of your peers. Who are our peers, right? So, like, is the UK our peers? The British, right? Those people who really know what's up in empire building, right? All right, so that's the white man's burden. Now we'll look at some responses to that. So this is by a guy named Henry Labouchere. And this is his response. So he says, pile on the brown man's burden to gratify your greed. Go clear away the who progress would impede. Be very stern, for truly 'tis useless to be mild with new-caught sullen peoples, half devil and half child, right? So this is kind of in stark contrast to what Kipling said. So Kipling said, right, that you're doing this for them, right? You're trying to improve their lives, blah, 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 blah. Here he's saying, well, one, the people who are actually burdened are the people who are not white. Why are you going? You're actually going because you're greedy. And you're actually going and you're mean, right? You are not patient. You are not mild. You believe that it is useless to be mild. Pile on the brown man's burden, and if you rouse his hate, meet his old-fashioned reasons with maxims up to date, right? So, okay. So if while you're burdening him with the colonial project and he decides that he doesn't like it, well, you just point your Maxim machine gun at him and, like, problems solved, right? Like, with shells and dum-dum bullets 100 times made plain. Like, what is plainer than when you get shot at? The brown man's loss must ever imply the white man's gain, right? So again, he's just challenging this idea of the rationale for imperialism, the justification for imperialism. Pile on the brown man's burden, compel him to be free. Let all your manifestos reek with philanthropy, right? So here we're essentially saying, oh, we're here to bring you civilization. And we even wrote it out in these beautiful essays about how we're doing so much good. But, like, really, that's not what's happening. And if with heathen folly, right, folly is silliness, he dares your will dispute. Like, if he questions why you're there and what you're doing, then in the native freedom, don't hesitate to shoot. Like, oh, sick burn. Right, like, how can you justify this, right? Like, what an amazing amount of mental gymnastics that is being done to say that you're bringing people civilization and freedom and then shoot them when they disagree, right? This is crazy. Pile on the brown man's burden, and if his cry be sore, that surely need not irk you. You've driven slaves before. Yikes. Right? That this is just, you're not bringing civilization to people, right? You are using them for forced labor, and they're still, it's sickening. Seize on his ports and pastures, the fields his people tread, go make from them your living, and mark with them his dead, right? That it is the burden of these colonized people. Pile on the brown man's burden, and through the world proclaim that ye are freedom's agent, and there's no more paying game. And should your own past history straight in your teeth be thrown, retort that independence is good for whites alone. Yikes, right? So he's really pointing out the violence that is inherent in imperialism and just the hypocrisy of the entire project, that these people are lying to themselves and they're lying to everyone else. All right, so last one. This one's called The Real White Man's Burden. And it's by a guy named Ernest Crosby. And Ernest Crosby was like a pacifist and an anti-imperialist. Like, he's a member of an anti-imperialist league. I'm pretty sure it's called the Anti-Imperialist League. And so this is his response to Kipling's The White Man's Burden. Take up the white man's burden, send forth your sturdy sons, and load them down with whiskey and testaments and guns. So basically, what they're bringing is alcohol, Bibles, and violence. however those shall combine, right? I don't know, the statement that he's making is that all of those are bad, that they are going for the wrong reasons, or that if they are going for the right reasons, that it will be kind of corrupted by the other two. He says then, throw in a few diseases to spread in tropic climes. For there the healthy blank are quite behind the times, right? So that as we're going, what are we actually spreading? We're spreading diseases, and we're going there because we see these people as backward, because we are not, in fact, cultural relativists. Instead, right, we're using social Darwinism to justify our own greatness. And don't forget the factories on those benighted shores. They have no cheerful iron mills, nor eke department stores, right? So essentially, like, cheerful iron mills, we know that iron mills are not in fact cheerful. So what he's saying is that we also have these like really not great aspects of our society. Should we spread those too, right? Like, he's looking at all of the negative aspects of Western society and then really questioning the value of spreading it. He goes on to say, they never work 12 hours a day and live in strange content, right? Like, how dare they be happy that they don't work 12 hours a day? I mean, I know I love working 12 hours a day, right? He's being very, very sarcastic. Right? They live in strange content, although they never have to pay a single cent of rent, right? So in terms of the Western model of property ownership, in terms of like, oh, I live in a tenement, and so therefore I pay rent to a landlord, that's not really a cool situation. Like, nobody likes paying rent or their mortgage. We do it because we have to, but it's not like, oh, yay, I'm so excited that I get to do this. Take up the white man's burden and teach the Philippines what interest and taxes are and what a mortgage means, right? So again, just kind of these onerous, burdensome aspects of our own lives that we should spread. Continuing on, give them electrocution chairs like for executions, and prisons too galore, and if they seem inclined to kick, then spill their heathen gore, right? So if they dislike all of the things that we are spreading to their societies, well, then we should just, spill their guts in a bad and murderous kind of way. They need our labor question too, and politics and fraud. We've made a pretty mess at home. Let's make a mess abroad. So labor question, right? We're talking about labor unions. We're talking about factory workers. We're talking about, like, for example, in 1877, there's a great railroad strike. There's also a number of strikes, like there's a Haymarket riot and other labor issues that you're going to learn about in AP US history. Right, politics, very corrupt. We're talking about Tammany Hall. We're talking about political machines. So basically, right, what he's saying is like, we're not so great that we should think that we're great enough to spread this elsewhere. And let us ever humbly pray the Lord of hosts may deign. So Lord of hosts as in God, and deign may kind of stoop to our level, may think kindly enough to do something for us, to stir our feeble memories, lest we forget the main. So what he's talking about here is why the United States entered the Spanish-American War. So the USS Maine was in Havana Harbor, and it explodes. And it explodes just in time as the press in the United States is really growing increasingly critical of Spanish rule in Cuba. The Spanish had really been treating the Cubans very badly, and the Cubans had an independence movement. This is where we get this phrase, the Cuba Libre, right? Free Cuba from Spain. And the United States very much sees Cuba, because it is so close to the United States, because it is a situation so reminiscent of our own, we really get behind the Cubans in their fight for independence from Spain. And we want to help them, but we also really shouldn't, because they are an independent country and it's weird. Or they're not an independent country and it's weird. So the Maine is in Havana Harbor and it blows up. and we decide that the Spanish have blown up the Maine, which why the Spanish would blow up the Maine, I guess they would just be mad that we were talking about how they should leave Cuba, so they blow up our warship. This doesn't make a lot of sense. Well, anyway, we believe it, that the Spanish blew up the Maine, and so we declare war on Spain, and we trounce them in like 6 weeks. It's especially interesting because General Dewey, who had been in the Navy in the Philippines, actually conveniently like landed in the Philippines prior to the Maine exploding, which is weird. But anyway, we defeat the Spanish, and so we get Guam and the Philippines and Puerto Rico and Cuba. But remember, the whole thing was we were there to support the Cubans' independence. So we give the Cubans this kind of pseudo-independence. You'll learn more about this in AP US history. But then we keep the other things. So, like, this is strange, right? Like, what is the hypocrisy going on here that the United States got into the Spanish-American War to aid in the freedom of Spanish colonies and ends up colonizing all but one of them? Interesting. Right, so by saying that, he is telling us that we have in fact forgotten the Maine, unless it was all lies, right? He is calling us hypocrites. Take up the white man's burden. To those who thus succeed in civilizing savage hordes, they owe a debt indeed. Concessions, pensions, salaries, and privilege and right. With outstretched hands you raise to bless, grab everything in sight. This very much reminds me of a song by my favorite band, Depeche Mode, called Everything Counts, which is essentially this kind of critique of this system where, right, these people are being taken advantage of, that, like, you say that you're there for one reason, you raise your hands to bless, but then what you end up doing is actually just kind of grabbing all of their stuff. Take up the white man's burden, and if you write in verse, like poems, flatter your nation's vices and strive to make them worse. Oh, snap. Then learn that if with pious words you ornament each phrase, in a world of canting hypocrites, this kind of business pays. Like, this is a sick burn. He has called everyone a hypocrite. He has called the British hypocrites. He has called us hypocrites. Anyone who believes in imperialism, who also cries freedom and liberty, they're hypocrites, right, is what he's saying. And it is just so amazingly sharp-tongued.